Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining me here today in today's talk. I would like to thank Eka, Annie, and Rory, who's not here today, and LCC for inviting me to the series and for all the technical support happened just now. As Eka was mentioned, I was actually a student here almost 10 years ago studying the MA Sauna program. And I'm actually really grateful for returning here and given this opportunity to share my creative journey since I graduated then and what I have been doing in the past 10 years. And yeah, today's session is going to be quite chill, just sharing some of my past works, listening to some sounds I made before, and sharing with you some of my old projects. So just now, Eka already said something about my bio. It was quite difficult for me to hear it as well. It was written first in Chinese, my mother tongue, and then translated. It's a whole process which I'm still finding a lot of struggle in. So my name's Yilei. I'm a Chinese-born artist and currently living and working in London for the past maybe 12 years. So my practice includes music making and live performances, site-specific installations, and writing. I'm expanding my practice to writing recently. But beyond all this label, I would like to simply just define myself as an explorer and wanderer of the sonic world. I know it sounds a bit pretentious, but that's actually how I feel. And that's what motivated me to continue this career. On the screen, it says tacit listening, sound as a carrier of perceptual attention in the field of threshold relation. It sounds like an essay topic, but it's not. Tacit listening is something that is ongoing research that I'm developing. It's a listening practice that fueled most of my creative making. And the reason why I chose this as the topic of today's lecture is not because I'm gonna expand talking about the subject and my research, theoretical research, is to show that today's lecture, everything I will be showing you is what leads me to want to explore more with tacit listening, a listening practice. So instead of explaining what tacit listening really is, today I'm bringing you onto a journey onto why I started to wonder what is tacit listening. So just a little bit more about my work. My work is concerned with presence and disappearance. It has a lot to do with my, I wouldn't say religious background, but how I was brought up. I was actually the daughter of a Tibetan nun, so I was brought up in a very heavily religious and spiritual family. And my interest in emptiness, the nature of emptiness, which is the foundation of the Buddhist philosophy, has been what's guiding me throughout my creative process. Even though I wouldn't describe myself as a religious person, but I would say the kind of pursuit for spirituality has been staying inside me and leading my way creatively. And I'm also really interested in how our perception shapes our creativity. And I use music making as a tool to investigate how perception really shapes the way I choose what and how to create. And I'm also interested about silence, absence, and the non-verbal state, which I will explain now. I actually didn't come from a musical background, so my approach to sound has always been very intrinsic, intuitive, and untrained. I'm coming from a fine art background actually. I was graduated from Goldsmiths University fine art degree. During my uni days, I gradually realized that I often resist materiality or resist mediums that requires physical occupation of a space, or it requires a direct demand on visual attention. So I naturally was drawn more towards sound or text or conceptual art, all these mediums that doesn't require, working with specific materials, physical materials. So during my early years before I started sound making or even delve into the world of sonic, realms, I noticed that my practice often fell into a recurring pattern. My work always seemed to disappear into itself, meaning that whenever an idea began to take shape or form in my head, its process of fading, dissolving, or perishing had already begun as soon as I have an idea in my head. I realized that I could not hold on to my ideas, just as I could not fully control how my ideas was first arose. So at some point, I also realized that my work was not generated from a singular point of origin. It felt more as if it had been shaped or even trimmed by an outcome that existed somewhere in the future. So that's the moment I realized creating has become a process of remembering. Inspiration at sometimes felt like memories to me. Where do they come from when they arise? Where do they go when they perish? I asked myself this question, but the question itself also began to fade away as soon as I tried to answer it. This sentence later became the title of the first song I made. It was also my first attempt to use sound as a carrier for the fleeting nature of my own thought. Sound, to me as a pre-linguistic tool, worked very well for me in capturing those moments of uncertainty and confusion happening in my head. This was the first time I realized that I was not just making music, nor I was using sound as a medium to translate my emotions as well. Instead, I think I was setting up a minimal system through which experiences could emerge. I was trying to construct perceptual conditions, working with constraints rather than compositions. And as I recall, when my interest in sound really began, I think it began much earlier than I could remember, much earlier than these two questions. As a person on the autism spectrum myself, I grew up with various sensory difficulties, often experiencing sensory overload, selective mutism, and a heightened sense of reality. My interest in sound began with a strong fear of sound. This hypersensitivity eventually made me want to take control of the environment I found myself in. For example, today, on my way here to the campus, I had to navigate through the public transportation. I've been struggling with taking on tubes, bus, airplanes, or like simply having a normal social life with people, because I'm always triggered and by the sound around me. My excessive sensitivity to sound when I was growing up meant that the external sounds often entered me violently. I felt that I've been entered or even raped by the sound surrounding me. They intruded without my permission, pressing against me, sometimes suppressing my own internal expression as well. This tension created a kind of passive resistance towards my output and expression. The input or the signals or the inputting sound from the outside world was too loud. So silence itself became another form of pressure for me, another kind of noise. Over the years, I began collecting sound as a coping mechanism for anxiety and sensory overload issues. Recording sound that could trigger a panic attack, or simply writing a sound down, became a therapeutical way for me to navigate my surroundings. Going outside became less unbearable. I would grab my phone or a recorder. I didn't have the money to buy a proper recorder, so I always use my phone. I still keep the habit until now, even I can afford one already, but I still like to use my phone because it's portable, it's simple, everyone has it. And the moment I can hold on to my voice memo app, I know I'm ready to press record at any time I want. When I hear a loud, sharp noise, I will just press the record, and then I felt like I'm a sound hunter, hunted down all these triggering sounds, and now I can collect them in my little archive. Then the environment gradually became a sonic field that I was allowed to enter instead of something I had to follow or endure. In 2019, I made a specimen piece, which is shown on the screen, by collecting 100 sounds over 100 days with a bird watching instrument. Over there, this is a binocular with recording and amplifying function. So basically you point at any direction in the wild or indoor, outdoor, and then it will amplify the sound of that area. But I don't suggest pointing it towards the speaker. I've done that. It would just create feedback. It's a kind of noise work, but yeah, it will be really triggering to your ear. So I was recording, examining specimens of the environment I was moving through, gathering and trying to understand them. I have also shown this piece in some galleries in China. I printed them out and I wrapped them in cling wrap, keeping them fresh, almost like a small gesture. Look, this is what I caught. These are the sounds that I hunted down. When the pandemic started, I was asked by Cafe Auto to contribute to their Takuloku label, a digital label created during the COVID time to support artists, musicians, and Cafe Auto during the quarantine. It was trying to feature works recorded at home, unedited, unmastered, and not studio recorded, like it's not perfect. So I made an album called The Specimen, using field recording samples I had gathered over the years from my own sound bank and archive, and I used the 100 sounds I collected as a score to guide me through the album making process. What you can see on this corner, this is a little specimen box I made, actually exhibited in the LCC canteen at the time. These glass slides are just a gesture representing 100 specimens of sound I collected. It's a little small sound box I still carry with me, and I really liked it actually. It's small, but it means a lot to me. I will play a song from this album, and let's see. background noise was sampled from, the receipt printing machine, and the clicking kind of melodic sound was actually from plucking rubber bands, and I tuned them into different pitch. How do we turn something that cannot be preserved into an experience? Is there a form of experience that does not need to explain itself, yet can still resist being compressed, violently archived, or categorized? Can we truly recreate temporal experience rather than simply produce compositions? With these questions, I began my sonic exploration, not in search for answers, but in pursuit for a barely reachable state of clarity for myself. I try to understand what it means to express, to create, to be heard, and to listen. I found myself constantly approaching the boundary between presence and disappearance, moving toward the threshold of what can almost be perceived. I began to pay closer attention to the process itself, or rather to a position of experience that exists before it can enter language, before it can be retrieved, explained, or fully understood. I began to search for experiences that is perpetually new, self-explanatory, and almost like the act of listening itself, passive, and we're just all passively receiving them, but it is perceptible. So I started with myself, starting with my own body. I began by noticing all the ongoing, unarchivable activities within my own body. I try to get a glimpse of how this fleeting process of creativity begins. Our body is a living creator that carries various complex systems with us. We are constantly creating, generating, refreshing ourselves. Since we can't really see how our neurons work in daily life, but there are some more obvious movements that we can observe in our body on a daily basis. Breathing, of course, was one of the first things that came to my attention. I started developing and practicing a score called BBB, breathing, blinking, beating. It is a score that invites participants to notice these three bodily rhythms, the three beats, as a kind of metronome for tuning into oneself. This score can be performed at any time, in any situation, alone or with as many people as you wish. You simply tune your awareness to the three B's and make a sound for each one. For example, in this lecture room, we are all involuntarily doing the three B's. You want it or not, you are doing it anyway. So how you actually perform this score? Every time you blink, you can knock on the table or snap your fingers. Every time you breathe, you might make a long inhaling or exhaling sound, or use a whistle. You might touch your wrist to feel your pulse and tap your foot to the rhythm of your heartbeat. And maybe you can even invite someone to listen to your chest. There is also an additional score that can be layered on top of these three B's, the humming scores, on the left, right side corner. Sit or stand in comfortable position. Be very mindful and alert with your thoughts. Hum when a thought arises in your mind. Stop when there's nothing in your mind. This performance can be done by one person or a group of people. This score was actually developed during my MA studying in the sauna course here. In November 2025, I presented a piece called The Three Breaths, together with a live performance integrating the BBB score. Three Breaths is a recurring project that has been performed and presented several times in different forms in the past. Its first presentation took place in 2018, as shown in the picture. At the time, I worked with a lawyer from Singapore to draft a licensing agreement titled Licensing Agreement of Existence. The agreement was printed on transparent vinyl sheet, as you can see on the right side, and in front of it is another work that I will explain later. So I work with a lawyer from Singapore remotely and draft this licensing agreement of existence. This legal document attempted to transfer the nature of my existence into objects, senses, and memories. Alongside the agreement, I recorded 3 breaths onto 100 empty cassette tapes for the audience to take away from. It's what you see on the left picture. The pile of white cassette tape was during the exhibition free for people to take away from. And by the end of the exhibition, it was all empty, all gone. So these are the screenshots of a video documentation of the entire process of me breathing 3 breaths onto 100 empty cassette tapes. The video of this whole durational performance was displayed during the exhibition as well. This is rolling video. Is it moving? It's moving. So this is the whole licensing agreement. It's probably too blurred for you to see, but basically in the agreement it says the licensor, myself, agreed to transfer all of my existence to licensees listed in the Appendix 1, which I will show in the next slide. In the Appendix 1 is list of licensees. They are all phenomena that manifest within the licensor's perception, including but not limited to senses, vision, sorry, I can't really see, senses, memory, material and immaterial objects. So basically what the licensing agreement of existence did was to transfer whoever the licensor is. It can be your name or my name or anyone's name. You can insert your name and your existence into the licensor's space, and then you're agreed, by signing this contract, you agree to transfer all of your existence into these things. In 2021, I performed a 10-hour-long durational version of this breathing piece, recording my own breath onto cassette tapes live in front of audience in a chapel near the ocean in Beijing. In the chapel, I was also live sampling the sound of ocean waves and playing them back into the space, as if I'm breathing together with the ocean. The audiences were welcome to enter and leave at any time. So my setup was, I have 100 empty cassette tapes in front of me, and I'm recording them live, breathing live, and live sampling and live processing the recordings that I collected from the ocean. As you can see on the right side is contact mics that I installed to collect sound from the ocean waves. So during the first 5 hours of the 10-hour-long durational performance, I live recorded 100 cassette tapes and distributed it, all of them, on the spot. People are welcome to come up and take one of them home. In the remaining 5 hours, I performed a minimal ambient set using the ocean sound recordings I had sampled earlier in the performance and to make a musical piece. This is the score of the performance I was doing. On top you can see is the sound pool representing the ocean, and in the center is myself. And all of these are the directions that I'm sending out, and is suggesting that my movement is indicating each one of these squares. So this is a live documentation of the performance that I did. In last year, November, I performed the latest version of this work at Unit 1 Gallery in London as part of the exhibition Wandering Till the Wind Whispered My Land, curated by Daisy Wang. This time, the work returned differently. Instead of breathing alone by myself, I offered 100 blank cassette tapes for participants to take home. Each person was invited to leave only 3 breaths, unlabeled, unrecorded, anonymous, and never to be played back. So I wrote the instruction on the cover of the tape. I instructed them to not record, don't label it, don't name it, and not to play back. So at this time, the work began to move away from the self. It was a process of decentering the body, withdrawing authorship, and depersonalizing the gesture of breathing. Rather than asserting expression, this work this time allowed the process to unfold naturally by the audience. So in this tape, it is not a sound, but gestures. It's not an archive, but a quiet dispersal. The work unfolds through occupancy rather than presentation. For the live performance in the Unit 1 Gallery, I used a hydrophone to record the sound of my throat, breathing, and my heartbeat onto a reel-to-reel tape recorder. At the end of the recording, I rewound the tape. While the tape was rewinding, I tried to pull it in the opposite direction with my body, wrapping myself in my own past traces, my breathing traces, my heart beating traces, all documented on the tapes. I'm rewinding them, pulling them out, pulling them towards my body, wrapping myself in it as if I was refusing to be played back. The tape eventually became super tangled around me in a restrained order. Eventually, I cut the tape open, cleaned up the remains, and ended the performance. I have a continuous interest in the disappearance of things. As you can see from the previous works, I like to let the work go to a natural disappearance and dissolution. And in the threshold where disappearance begins to take place, the transition between day and night, for example, is hard to perceive. So we can't really grasp when things starting to vanish and disappear. Just like we can't really grasp when is the day starting to turn from day to night. Burn piece on the screen is an instruction score that I created in 2021. The score is very simple. It says, burn a violin, use the remaining charcoal to draw a new violin. This work was showcased at the Crypt Gallery as part of an exhibition curated by Daisy Wang as well. During the exhibition, I had the sound recording of the burning violin. The strings, while the burning happening, the strings was tapping the wooden surface and making this cracking sound. And I was showing the remains of this violin and a picture of a new violin that I drew with the remains. skip the video a bit. So the process of disappearing and becoming something new almost feels ritualistic for me. And what ritual means to me is about realizing cycles. Not only being part of a cycle, but also being aware of the cycle. Breathing, leaving, decaying, birthing, ripening and dissolving are all part of a larger cycle, a ritual of revisiting and becoming. In February this year, I took part in Living, Rehearsing, Reverberance, a program curated by Zhuo Mengting, Erin Lee, and Billy Tan. It was hosted by YDP Space in London. I was commissioned to develop a performance project around the idea of ritual. On the left side was the lineup of my program. This series of program has 4 different sections, and for my part, we were asked to explore the idea of ritual. I presented my installation piece called Not Yet Still, Runaway Self-Referential Loop. It is a 6 hours durational performance piece that explores how ritual shapes attention and alters perception. I occupied YDP's conservatory in this space, positioning the work as a living clock residing in the building that is constantly measuring time through vibration, repetition, and continuous movement. So in my setup, I have several metallic sculpture hanging on top. All of them are made of copper, and I have and I have copper tape, conductive copper tape, taping the whole space in a square. Here I have a copper sheet, and here a copper tube. And all these sculptural pieces are all taped with conductive tape and wires. So I have 3 tone generators placed at the corners of the room, one here, and one here. The tone generator here are linked to a vibrator. So by tuning the frequency of the tone generator, it creates different vibration, and then you can adjust the kind of waveform that you want to produce, and then adjust the hertz that you want it to be. So this tone generator was linked with this copper sheet hanging from the ceiling. So when I turned on the tone generator to very high or very low frequency, it started vibrating violently and creating an echoing, drumming sound. So during the live performance, when I'm present in the space, I will hold the copper sheet, bending it, hold it towards me, pull it away, pull it further, or pull it towards me, and it will all create different sonic soundscape. So the copper sheet is creating a tube-like effect that is producing this echoey resonance in the space that is very loud. And if you put your ear or you wrap your head with the copper sheet, you can hear very loud drone sound coming from it. And in the middle, I have a Klagme plate, which is a very famous plate that it shows the pattern of the kind of frequency that it generates. And during the performance, I was constantly pouring salt on it and then adjust it to different frequency. It's a very straightforward and direct way of showing people how frequency is manifested in a visual aspect. So on the left side, I I have a copper plate which is linked to this wooden drum. So when I turn on the tone generator to generate different frequency, it will start shaking the drum and creating a little like rumbling effect. So what does the conductive tape in the space does is that I walk with my bare foot on the floor and then touching the copper wires and everything made of copper in the space, and then it will create a kind of sound. And this sound source was generated from a MIDI sound source. Moving away from the treatment of time as an external sequence of events, time in this space is engaged as a position, something one inhabited rather than observes. Ritual is understood as the center of the clock rather than its hand, an anchor that does not move, yet around which all movement becomes legitimate. Within the space, no single action, sound, or object serve as a focal point. Subtle and continuous physical movements, vibrations, accumulations, resonance, and repetition is occupying the room over time. So in this space, nothing tries to begin and nothing resolves. There's no intention to represent time or guide interpretation, but to establish a perceptual condition which briefly dislocates the idea of the forward linear time. So this is my understanding of how my installation is acting as a clock residing in the YDP space. So while my performance and installation was moving on its own, generating frequencies and vibrating, there are other performances going on in the whole building. So people are not here to watch my installation or my performance. They are here to glance at a clock. So in this environment, this is not a stage for me. The space is treated as an active participant. Sound, vibration, and physical matter respond to both human presence and the architectural body of the building. I set my role to not perform a fixed sequence of actions, but try to act as a temporal anchor within the room and within the building. I'm adjusting conditions, tuning the machines, stepping on the conductive tapes, touching the conductive surfaces, making sound, and trying to maintain a sense of continuity. I'm trying to maintain the space and trying to make the space to remain in a state of ongoing change rather than a static state. I'm interested in archivable experiences, unarchivable experiences. I think you can probably tell from all the work that I have mentioned just now. And I'm also interested in how they resist being fixed into a single form. Just like the violin, it can be something else. It resists to being fixed into an instrument. All the things I work with, breathing, that is something impossible to keep. Vibration, that is something that is unstable. Repetition is something that is without an endpoint. Time and a clock is something that we are difficult to grasp. So during my mini Japan tour in 2025, I have collaborated with a musician and artist called Aus to make a private showcase at a traditional Japanese tea house. I have been collecting small and abandoned objects from each city I have traveled to during the tour: Tokyo, Kyoto, Nagoya, Osaka, Wakayama, and at the end of my tour, I composed with these objects together and constructed an improvised sculpture piece that served as a visual focal point for a sound piece that I created. Through collecting few recordings along my travel in each city, I made two sound pieces. One was made from organic field recordings, and another was made from the resonance of the sculptures themselves. So I realized during my creative process, I realized the relationship between me and the work that I produce. My job is to set up the condition for my work to continue being renewed on its own through changes, redefinition, and reactivation by myself, by the surroundings, by the environment, by people, or anything that pass through them. So I'm also really interested in the exchange and differences and the flexibility between different modes of perceptions. You can see that I like to change objects' original purpose and then change them into something else, like changing the violin, changing the purpose of a tape recorder, changing the purpose of, for example, inanimated objects. And as you can see here is a step piece that I make, also made by discarded object that I collected from rubbish bin or just my surroundings, and then put them together, and I call them a score. And these things will help me tremendously during my music making process, and I could call that my own graphic scores. So it's also maybe because my synesthesia tendencies, I'm drawn to the ways sound can be can indicate itself through other stuff, through text, image, or symbols. I like to explore how sound is heard in situations that are not necessarily centered on listening, and how the definition of listening can be stretched, extended, and reshaped. I'm interested in sound as a landing point for attention, as a ripple of pure awareness rather than composition, rather than materials for compositions. I began releasing music in 2018 with my first EP, followed by my first LP in 2019. My first record was called Unlabeled Form. It was a direct translation from its original Chinese name, 不能之相, literally means a failed form, or an imagery that is refusing to appear or fail to express itself. It was my first attempt in this album to use non-linguistic and non-material means to approach things that are difficult to describe verbally, define, or give form to. This is something that I struggle with as a person on the autism spectrum. I always find it hard to properly and correctly express myself without being misunderstood or incorrectly delivered. So this album was a very rough and raw attempt for me to use all sorts of various electronic devices like Eurorack systems, analog synthesizers. At the time I didn't define myself as a musician. I was just simply trying to find a method to translate my non-verbal state into something that can be delivered, distributed, and be heard. I'm not sure if I can play an audio from. Let me try. This is a song, one of the songs in this album. In 2020, during the 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine at the beginning of the pandemic, I completed an ambient album, which is my second record release, titled Off, in a quarantine hotel. This album takes the 12 traditional Chinese hour called 时辰 as its point of departure. In the Chinese system, each 时辰 corresponds to a 2-hour period. During quarantine, as my perception of time began to blur in the hotel room, each day became increasingly repetitive, and the act of recording time itself starting to feel almost absurd. So I began to repeatedly visit each 2-hour interval, translating each 2 hours into a purely poetic expression of time. So here you can see I have 12 tracks, each titled with a single word. And this album was actually my first attempt in trying in a more ambient and ambient style, I would say. And this album was dedicated to my mother, because because at the time I think the world was filled with fear and uncertainty, and I think before that I was making a lot of noise sound, and I think it's time for me to give out something about love and peace, as simple as that. And it's a present for my mom. I'm just gonna quickly go through my record releases because I'm a musician. In 2023, I released my third record, Non-Age, 垂髫. In Chinese, 垂髫refers to the period of early childhood, when a child's hair falls down loosely and untied and is falling down naturally, representing a time associated with innocence, softness, and unguardedness. So this album is also an exploration of time. You could see that in the previous two albums, I'm always revolving myself around time. And this time, I took a leap in time and went back to a specific period of my life, re-examining what nostalgia, grief, and trauma might mean. Initially, this project was actually an archiving project for myself to collect all the childhood sounds that I have in all the videotapes and all the televisions, but then eventually it becomes a record retracing and reimagining fragments of my childhood memories through smell, location, and colors, and bring to life the linear feeling that remains into adulthood. I will play one of the playful track from this album to So in this album, I used many broken toy instruments from flea markets, and I turned an old damaged umbrella into a wind chime, as shown at the back of the album. It's a broken umbrella with chimes inside, and when you spin it, it can make really nice sound. So in this album, I also transformed a conch shell into a simple theremin instrument, and these are the stuff that I use for this album: objects, toy pianos, alphabet machines, and flutes. There's a noise box, finger piano, and yeah, that's all. So when writing this record, I wrote to myself and trying to recall my younger age self, and I said, I remember pressing piano keys like touching flowers, reading scores like looking at paintings, writing like how I would talk to myself, greeting death like how I would greet life. So when I make music, I think I almost do not think with language or with my mind. Language during the music making process is being compressed into a form of expression where thoughts became completely silent. I see my albums as essays in sound, as sonic text, as perceptual studies for myself, rather than sonic compositions. They are sonic works in which sound is presented directly as perceptible materials. So in my album making and so-called music making process, sound to me functions as a perceptual surface. I'm composing, capturing, and documenting states rather than dealing with scores or notes. Though my musical work can be easily categorized from the outside as ambient, electronic, experimental, or something else, but I do not compose through emotions or composing within certain genre. Rather, I use sound to reorganize my internal states of perception and trying to regulate the way I perceive my surroundings through the sound making process. So the outcome might turn out to be musical, but for me this is the internal structure and whole perceptual ecosystem for myself. So structurally, it aligns more closely with the condition-based and perceptual practices. I would say there is a tension and misalignment in my work because I do work with many different fields and materials. So it's hard to really define myself as solely a musician or a sound artist or visual artist or performance artist. So this tension and misalignment in my work's internal structure and external presentation is not something I'm trying to resolve actually. Instead, I try to maintain it as part of the work itself. So on the reception surface, the work being received as certain genre of music, but on the construction side, the work was built and intended as a perceptual system. I find this tension becomes a very productive side within my own practice, so I'm still continuing this creative process myself. So within this sonic layer of my work, I hope to create a liminal state where I want to allow emotion to seep out rather than being expressed. Also during the same period of time, I worked on several theater score projects. So collaborating with dancers, theater makers, and scriptwriters, my understanding of the relationship between sound, body, and the sight gradually became clearer. At the beginning of the pandemic outburst, I was involved in a physical theater project by Paper Tiger Theater titled Infection. It's very COVID related, State of Emergency, and Beethoven. Through this collaboration, I was given the opportunity to grow and expand alongside my own sonic practice. I get to play sound live, to work with poetry, and to understand sound as a suspended ghost residing in the theater space, which is a space that I'm not familiar with. In this collaboration, I became my own grandma, I would say. I get to speak as sound itself, and I was not just a sound designer, I was a ghost in the script. Here is a short documentation of the theater piece that I worked in.
它起火了。最近我见到一座房子，它起火了，火苗填着屋顶。我走上前去，
We don't have enough time, so I'm gonna just skip through the video.
在此之前，我一直拒绝接触，我不
水在低语，冬天有雷电闪烁，野百合花和野草莓没有被上市。花园里，那曾回响过当年狂喜的笑声，如今有味消寂。但是在要求平安时，死亡与降生的痛。
So in June 2023, I was invited by choreographer Kyle Abraham to take part in his project Planting Connections. The project paired 4 musicians with 4 dancers, inviting each pair to collaborate independently and create a short choreography of around 15 to 20 minutes length, and the performance took place at Hertz Plaza in front of Henry Moore sculpture in Lincoln Center in New York. I spent one afternoon only with Vincent Fraley, who's the dancer on the left, in the dance studio, closely observing and sensing the way his body moves, spoke, and formed its own language. It's a complete different language system that is different from my own. By listening to his body, we developed a shared choreography within a very short period of time. He through his body, and I through sound. We work together, and we listen to each other. Scoring for dance doesn't have to be a body waiting for sound to move them. And it doesn't have to be sound waiting for a body to indicate and send out cues. We were not translating each other, we were not interpreting each other, rather we were growing and listening together through different forms. This was to me the meaning of planting connections, and I'm gonna play a short clip of the composition that I made for his dance work. Between 2022 and 2023, I also created scores for a few theater works and film scoring. They are all stories based on different cultures and backgrounds. I find it very challenging but fun at the same time to work within this kind of work. Because I'm not coming from a musical background, I'm not used to scoring for big productions. It's challenging, but it's also giving me a chance to step out of my own comfort zone and to learn to work with a larger team and to work with other people from other creative individuals from other practices. I have composed for Venus by Impermanence Dance Theatre, a dance theatre piece based on the story of suffragettes, based on Emily Pankhurst and Mary Richardson. And a recent theatre project was called Prayers of the Hungry Ghost, a story based on Chinese mythology by theatre maker and performer Elizabeth Guanawan. They just finished their sold-out premiere show in the Barbican Centre this year and currently on tour in the UK right now. So if you're interested, you can catch the tour date and have a look at it. It's a really beautiful story. I'm gonna play the trailer for it. So in this kind of collaborative projects, because I was not trained as a composer in a conventional sense, I could not immediately rely on harmonic techniques like chords or scales and compositional templates to respond to different scenic requirements. Often I could only understand the direction of the music through the dialogue and the text, movements and body. This is because my usual way of making work is through semantic compression and expansion. Inspiration for me often feels like a kind of nostalgia. As I said just now, it almost felt like a memory of a work that belongs to an unfinished future. This memory requires particular conditions in order to be triggered for me. So, repeatedly reading the scripts and placing myself inside the dialogue became necessary for me when creating music for specific scenes in theater, dance, and collaborative projects. So through the process of making theater scores, collaborating with dancers, making albums, I began to realize that once a sound became a finished recording, it no longer feels as if it belongs to me anymore. It belongs to the bodies, text, timing, and architectures of attention. In the theater, sound belongs to the narrative. It belongs to the site, to the space of resonance between performers and audience. Like the dialogue, it is held inside a black box. Sound inside the theater space almost felt like music inside a music box to me. So I struggle with performing live, performing my music live, or performing my compositions live. Sound to me is not independent outcomes anymore within this theater and film and scoring field. The same goes for my own albums. Once an album is completed, an album becomes something that is space-time, that's almost like the space-time model described in the block universe theory, is a completion without beginning or an end. And so performing these works again and again in live settings became a problem for me. So as an artist and musician, especially when you release albums, it's important to do live performances and to sometimes promote your own work by touring or like performing it live. This seems unavoidable for me, but because I do not have any management company or agency or someone tells me to do in my early stage of my career, when I was invited to perform things live, I did not know what is the right thing to do. Like, should I press play? Like, I've already done the piece of music, why do you want to hear it again? You can just hear it on Spotify. That was my internal logic. So I was not sure whether I truly want to perform works that's already felt completed live again and again. So most of my music is recorded at home with Ableton. I don't have a studio. My setup very minimal. I like to use the voice memo function on my phone, as I said, to record sound under my duvet for noise cancelling. Sometimes it's just my voice, sometimes it's the sound of small objects colliding. I also experiment with instruments from different countries, different culture backgrounds, sampling their unique textures in ways that feel instinctive to me. So I don't really use one instrument. I like to try many different things. I make my own instrument racks, noise boxes, small sound making systems. I work with theremin, Chinese traditional instruments, Eurorack systems, found objects, domestic materials. On the right side, this is a sound shelf that I made for a Cafe Auto performance in 2017-18. And in the middle is a granite plate I made for my MA Sound Art degree show, actually. And these are a sculpture made of string, and then it can be amplified by a piezo pickup. And these are circuit band Eurorack systems that I built myself as well. And I'm gonna quickly show you how I started my theremin journey, since we're running out of time. So in my live performances, the instrument I choose to use the most is the theremin. The theremin is one of the earliest electronic musical instruments, uniquely played without physical contact, which is something that I'm very drawn to. Created by the Russian physicist Leon Theremin in 1920, it is played through hand gestures that manipulates invisible electromagnetic fields, continuously controlling pitch. Right hand is the pitch hand, left hand is the volume hand. So I began experimenting with building my own theremin in 2017, and here I will play a short clip to you using the first theremin that I built at Cafe Auto in 2018. It is a mini theremin, which is here. Later you can see green light indicating that I'm adjusting each pitch range and volume range. I'm gonna skip the video to the theremin playing. was an introduction to theremin and how I started. I was drawn to the idea of how an instrument does not require direct physical touch. The invisibility, fluidity, uncontrollability, and untouchability of the electromagnetic field. There's a particular tension in playing the theremin. You are both outside of the instrument and inevitably caught within it. It's not like a guitar, you have to plug it in, or like you need to stop pressing, then it starts playing. The moment you turn the theremin on, you're caught in. You cannot avoid being carried by it. You cannot avoid affecting it. My relationship with the theremin began very early in my practice. At first, it was connected to the question around other-bodied, the muted state, as I mentioned, as neurodivergent individuals, distance and queerness as well, muteness and the impossibility of direct contact to the outside world. It's almost like a perfect metaphor and a representation for me that it is hard for me to directly touch the outside reality, and therefore I chose this medium to represent this unreachable tension between me and the outside world. So these early works were not technically precise, just like the one I showed you just now, but they already carried a question that still remains in my practice today. How does a body enter a field, and how a field responds to the body? Similar to how the individual respond to the outside surrounding, and how do the outside surrounding respond to them? And how does sound emerge from an unstable relation? Where and how do they arise, and where do they go? Back to the beginning questions that I was showing at the first few slides. At the beginning of 2020, just before the outbreak, 1 month before the outbreak of the pandemic, I was facing the expiration of my visa and had to leave the UK. My last performance before leaving took place at Rich Mix London, which I was invited to take part in the Querying Now event. There, I performed a piece titled "Your Figures Are Muted," they said. In this work, I used theremin and various hand gestures to read out a poem I wrote. The poem was about identity, gender anxiety, and the attempt to amplify marginalized voices from Chinese queer community, and my own inability to express myself fully. As you can see here, I have poetry played and projected at the back of the stage, and then I will try to speak it out, read it out through my hand gestures and theremin. One of the other early theremin work I did was also part of the Querying Now program, curated by the same artist, Whiskey Chow. At the time, I already went back to China during quarantine, so I had to attend this festival remotely. I used photo booths on my MacBook to record a performance video at home using my body and theremin. So this is a live streamed version, is a screenshot of a live streamed thing. And I'm using my body to adjust the audible range of the theremin. And I have also wrote another piece of poetry with it. The setup is super minimal. It was just in my bedroom. I turned my laptop on, the front camera, and then just recorded it. I tried out different postures, tried out different ways of manipulate the theremin. The work was titled Hatch. It is a story revolving around fantasies of gender dysphoria and queer fragility, unfolding through movements, time, theremin, and metronome. You can see this repeating, motif happening in my work: time, movement, disappearance. And at the beginning of this piece, I wrote down, "Hatching from the wondrous trance I lay," symbolizing rebirth as an alchemic journey and change. And more about the pandemic era, because it's quite an important era for me. I developed a lot of work around the time due to the quarantine. I participated in many online music festivals and contributing work remotely to the UK. So when we have to think about how to contribute through digital platforms, we have to think about how do you present work on screen. So at the time I was exploring ways of transforming images to sound. I found a very minimal piece of software called Photo Sounder. It's a very simple, direct, low budget very not like something coming from the AI era. It allows you to import your image and analyze its color temperature, pixels, and visual structures. And you can see on the left side, there's the hertz that you can adjust, and on the right side, there's different range of the notes. So I made a lot of scores and pictures, and I import them in. The outcome of them are not, the result of them are not musical in conventional sense. The software is essentially a tone generator, but it opened up many possibilities for visual and sonic exploration for me. Here's one example of an online festival curated by Joshua Minsuking as part of Tongo's festival online. And the background is layered with many recording samples from this software using photographs I took and images that I made, layer together, creating a sense of drone padding in the background. And here is a theremin piece that I did to accompany the sound samples generated by the Photosounder software. I'm gonna skip, we're running out of time. Here I'm trying to mimic a bird with a flower. After returning to the UK and following by the release of my first two albums, I was invited by Non-Classical to perform at the Barbican Centre. Non-Classical is a platform founded by Gabriel Prokofi. For the event, he curated a program titled Listening to Place, which explored how we might reconnect with the world of sounds through performances engaging with environmental noise, found sound, field recordings, and listening across cultures. And the lineup was London Research Center, Photo Language, Gabriel Prokofi, Rebecca Omodia, Kate Carr, Legate Quartet, and Sidra Famon, and myself. In this, apart from performing materials from my own album, I wanted to explore in my own way what it means to listen to place. I didn't want to, because there's already a lot of field recording samples in my albums, natural environmental sound, sonic fragments gathered from different surroundings, but I also want to bring in environmental materials that I recently filmed, photographed using the software to generate tones from these images, and then process these tones in Ableton, transforming them into MIDI signals, and use the theremin as a MIDI controller to perform them in the Barbican. This way, the theremin becomes not only an instrument, but a point of contact between body, image, place, and sound. And it allowed me to perform an environment without directly representing it. So this is video of the performance at the Barbican. Exploring different sites and the possibility different venues carry. When I receive an invitation to perform in particular venue, be it a concert hall or a small venue or underground venues, I often care about what I care about the most is the sonic potential embedded in the visual structure of that space. I try to understand what kind of structural language the site is already speaking. So each of my performance is very highly influenced by the site itself. That is also why I do not like to repeatedly performing the same thing over and over again. And for me, the site itself is also a performer, an instrument, and an extension to the listener as well. We are carried by the site, becoming part of its field. So as a person who plays theremin, I care about this relation between the performer and the feel that the instrument is providing. So one venue I particularly loved was Liquidrum, a spa center in Berlin, where I created an underwater installation and live performance in May 2024. The event was curated by Queen K and titled, Is It Cold Underwater? Liquidrum has a warm saltwater pool with a very high salt concentration, allowing people to float effortlessly on the surface, almost like floating in the Dead Sea. So the pool also equipped with underwater sound system, so when you lie on your back and float on the water, your ears are gently submerged beneath the water, lightly, allowing you to hear the sound from below the surface. Sorry. So this is a sound loop piece I did for this pool, and people just floating on it. I didn't take a picture of the people naked, but you get the gist. So that's happening inside the pool, but outside the spa, I invite the listener to surrender to the rhythmic pulse of hydrofeminist exploration created by me. I use a hydrophone put inside the pool and ask them to turn up the underwater bubbling so that I could sample it live, and then I played theremin around the idea of fluidity and hydrofeminism. So by the fool's edge, I immerse myself in the aquatic realm, and I invite people to do that as well. So this is one of the venues that really shapes the way I perform. In early 2023, with the support of Arts Council England's DYCP funding, I began a practice as research project around the tacit nature of things, and I called it tacit listening, something that is unspeakable, implicit, and difficult to give concrete form to. It became a multivalent program designed to encourage what I call tacit listening, a nuanced and unspoken listening practice that attends to the unheard, disabled, muted, and silenced sound. In January 2023, the project began with Tacit Act 1, where I was invited to perform at a housewarming event for the newly opened EC Contemporary Gallery in Manchester. This marked the beginning of the research in practice in 2023. I decided during this process, the funded process, to give myself completely to live performance, setting up uncontrollable elements for each event and placing myself within unfamiliar and random contexts to see how I might find the arising of the tacit. So within the 1 year of the time supported by Arts Council England, between 2023 to 2024, I gave many performances of different scales in different countries and different venues. In each one, I tried to perform in completely different, unpredictable, and unfamiliar ways to myself. I don't plan in ways I usually do. I let accidents happen just to see where it will lead me. In July the same year, I was invited to perform at Taikun Contemporary in Hong Kong as part of the public program accompanying their exhibition of Sound Art Archive. The event was titled Sound Like Prints, curated by Ingrid Pre-E Chu and Dr. Edward Sanderson for Taikun Contemporary Artist Book Library. This was the last act of my tacit exploration. So for the performance, I moved through central Hong Kong around the site of Taikun, collecting few recordings to measure the boundary between the institution and the city. I was responding to not only to specific location across Taikun, but also to the materials I found there, mapping the situation that eventually culminated in my performance there. So I collected many discarded objects and used simple battery-powered motors and vibrator to activate them, as if pressing a command that set them into a perpetual motion, much like the city, Hong Kong itself. So in the performance, I worked with these collected sound and samples. And in Hong Kong, I felt like I was trying to search for looseness within orders and repetition, but I failed. And I did a performance completely on my failure in searching for that order. The last end of my DYCP funding, I was invited to support Suzanne Ciani's performance at King's Place in London. And when I approached the end of the period supported by this funding period, I decided to return once again to my theremin. For this performance, I wanted to create the growth of a single melody within the space. I want to allow pauses, allow blank spaces, and allow the sound to unfold with restraints. In a review published by the Wire magazine, it described the performance as beginning with solitary bird-like melody played with whistles and quickly jump into association with environmental fragility, artificial intelligence, simulating nature, and the possible memory of world after disappearance. This interests me into thinking how the listener's perception is driven by association. I realized that my role as a performer is not necessarily to deliver a fixed meaning, but to create a point zero condition in which imageries can be activated. My role is to create and sustain a field where the listener is invited to feeling meanings for themselves. So in this performance, I felt the growth of sound and the conditions that allows it to grow were happening at the same time. They were not connected through a linear chain of cause and effect. Instead, they completed each other simultaneously. And this lead to my practice. I'm going to skip through that and quickly jump to the theremin part. So earlier I mentioned what draws to me the theremin is a multi-dimensional field of relation. Its sound generating logic is not completely linear, but it's more like a complex field in which relationship and thresholds become perceptible. So with traditional instruments, you have hand, contact, and sound is created. But with theremin, the relationship is different. It's hand and space coexisting, an electronic magnetic field creating a relation field together, and then producing sound. Sound is not simply a produced outcome, it emerges from a relation. The theremin is a system that translates invisible changes into sound. It's not a matter of controlling an instrument, rather my body itself becomes the variable. So through the relationship between the body and the theremin, I create a tension of movement, gestures, and boundaries, making visible or making audible, and see how sound flow out of relation. I'm not sure if I should stop here, but do we need to leave time for the?
Yeah, we do need to leave a bit of time. And were you gonna play the theremin?
I was gonna like go through these bullet points of how they are, but I can quickly demonstrate the theremin, but maybe we can start with the Q&A and see if there's any question around the theremin so I can demonstrate, maybe.
Yeah, sure, let's do that. Let me just check the time. Yeah, so we've got 14 minutes left of the session, so if anyone has any questions, does anyone have any questions? Because if you, yeah, there's one.
Just a very brief one. You talked about the need to play live to promote albums. How did you resolve that particular thing? You've obviously done a lot of very, very different performances. Did you just decide to do different performances and not repeat them?
Yes, I actually did that, and I think, as I mentioned before, I didn't come from music background, or I was not part of a so-called musical industry. I don't have anyone telling me what am I supposed to do. So I think the DYCP funding at the time was giving me a lot of leverage to kind of supporting my own project, even though I find it very hard because when people obviously they don't know my other works, they probably heard my music somewhere or bought my record, and they expect to hear the same thing when someone performs. So I would say that during the 1 year of challenging myself, like I mentioned, I throw myself completely into the live performance experience. When I say that, I mean by completely let go of external expectations and kind of be a little bit irresponsible for external expectation, but be truly responsible for my own decision and take accountability for that. Because I do encounter during that year, I have many venues, they promote my performance with my album music, and obviously people come, they expect certain things. But when I suddenly throw in completely random or even too minimal, too empty, or too noisy kind of performance, you let them down. But I guess the process was teaching me to see whether I still have the ability to have something ripening from my intrinsic creativity. I was kind of testing myself to see whether creativity is something that needs to be only protected or restrained in a controlled environment. And I was wondering whether it can grow wildlessly and even dangerously for myself, because unpredictability, I'm not classically trained, or I'm not, conventionally trained. So I would say that the whole process of doing things live but throwing myself out there is quite scary. But I did it anyway. I'm sure I let many people down, promoters and.
But I think you might have made a wise choice for your mental health, because you weren't doing the same thing again and again. It seems really wise to me. So thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question about routine and lifestyle and work-life balance and how you manage that.
I don't have that. I don't have work-life balance, and I think that's probably also why my whole presentation is quite, I personally think it's quite messy, but in a way that I intended it that way. I was kind of using this lecture as an opportunity, not lecture, a talk, this talk as an opportunity to kind of reorganize my creative journey, because I'm not a very organized person, and I believe this is a consequence of being quite sensitive and constantly creative. Is a side effect of it, because it overflowing into my mind. I don't have a clear boundary of this is the time I should work. I should set a time frame, start project based, and work slowly towards that. As I mentioned, I felt like inspiration is something that arises from somewhere. And that place is a mutual ground for every single existence to appear, I would say. So by exploring where that thing come from and where do they perish, almost like finding where our first breaths come from, or the gap in between breathing, the gap in between different notes in a song. And I think that finding out that kind of gap is what I mean by finding the method of tacit listening. And this listening practice can be applied to many things in our life, I would say personally as well, is a listening or perceptual method to see things as they are, rather than taking them as a linear process or carrying the weight of our memory and then carrying the weight of our future, but really to stay in between the gap and to see each single note, each single breath as its own. So I keep talking about time and the non-linear state is because I was going to talk in my later slides, which is it's getting more theoretical in the end, but then I was going to talk about how we listen to a piece of music and how that's different from visual culture work, because with visual culture stuff, we see things as a whole. We see a painting is already there, and it has a rich history of discourse, and basically visual culture is it has a long history. You don't need to go through with it. You're there and they're there, and you're looking at it as a whole, just like the space-time theory, the block theory. Like the time is already there. We're just living through them. But with music, the difficult thing is that with live performances or like a live music, the experience is irreversible and is one time only. If we don't talk about documentation, recording, or whatever, you can only experience certain things on the go. But when we experience certain things like that, like the Wire magazine review says, people can trigger a lot of their own association with a piece of sound or a piece of music. That's because we're listening with memory carried behind our back. We're listening with the continuity of the previous note and the note before previous note and how it starts, and then we're gradually going towards the end with it. So tacit listening method is not really something that is encouraging you to continue this continuity. Rather, it's encouraging you to stay in between gaps, just like staying and finding that arising ground before breathing. And I find theremin as a very useful practical tool for me to physically understand this relation, which I was planning to talk more about, but I don't have time. But this year I'm planning to develop my writing project around this subject. So theremin, they're introducing a multidimensional, almost topological field that is not linear. You don't produce sound in a linear way. You're dealing with hand, humidity, temperature, palm, gestures, the way you lean towards your body, the way you bend, the slide movements, air, even the metals in the room, the field. You're interacting with everything. So it's like a total, it's like a, how to say, it's like a relational device that it forces you to be super present, and it forces you to not be able to carry things in a linear way. So when performing theremin, I realized that each note was not is not a continuation from the previous note, but it's an individual note. But the note is the cause and effect and the consequences itself. So I was gonna move on to talk about the boundary of things as like where's my boundary of life work balance and all that. I don't have that, and I think I'm someone who in my own work and in my own like practice wise, I'm someone who's trying to navigate and find out this boundary thing. Like where does it end? Where does the sound first produced? Where does the sound disappearing when it's decaying into silence? When is the true disappearance start? And with my own work and practice and my own private life, I also find that spectrum really blurred and then just shifting around it. I think that summarizes everything, and I don't actually separate my own, for example, my sexual identity or my racial identity, all these problems. I don't isolate them as individual events. I see them as all part of my creative process, and I think I was really grateful to be given this opportunity to kind of clear my head out to really talk things in somewhat in an order. I try to avoid talking in chronological order this time. I was jumping in time out, 2018, 2025. I was trying to mess it up. My goal today was to bring us together onto a remembering process with me as well. So for me, all these works is almost like things happen in the past. Like I said in the instruction of the cassette work, that is a dispersal. It's not to try to archive, it's not trying to label, it's not trying to centering back to the self. It's a process of letting go. And through this process, I think some sort of boundary can appear and then it can be gone again. And I'm happy to live in that fluidity of change. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Could we have a theremin demo?
Yes, we can.
For 3 minutes?